Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention already. And I will a little bit also it's about is a good starting point, this talk for me or for my topics. And I will start with this image. Where can you see it? Where's the image from the presentation? It's over here. Amazing. It's from 1980. And I want to start with this because it's an image from one of the first computer game that tells its story not only through text, but also using two-dimensional graphics. And what is interesting about this image and about this game that is called Mystery House, I just said it, is this tree actually on this side. Because I think it's one of the first trees that was ever depicted in a computer game or in a digital environment itself. In his four-part series, Parallel, from 2012, Haroon Farokhi shows also a part of this game in a frame where he's talking about the history of representation of plants in computer animation. After his little tour around this representation of trees, he's ending with these images and with the notion in 2012 that computers are capable to create images of trees that are indistinguishable from cinema images. Well, I think we can agree that even 10 years later, we have a kind of a race going on for even more realism, even more detail, and even more frames. Although realism is today not the only aim in art making, in games making, in architectural simulation, I think we can agree that it's in the core of the popular culture of AAA games. Realism is a kind of a benchmark. An intense involvement and focus on questions of representation were for me unavoidable, working for 15 years in theater and performing arts. I find it really exciting to see how images and media technologies perform, how we react on them, and then, like in a circular process, how we reshape images and technologies. In the jungle of concepts and definitions, I just want to make clear that representation is for me something of being a representative, or a splendid and dignified form of appearance. For me, a very interesting question around representation is, why does something look like this or that? And what social and cultural drivers contribute to its aesthetic and its charge? And what kind of reality is constituted by the difference between the sign and the signified? In today's very increasingly complex and very contradictory society, mechanisms of representation are changing dramatically. Our life has become a story, and we have to represent ourselves in this story. Think of social media. And also nature has to tell a story in order to survive. I took these photos of two plates I find in non-digital environments of plants that has to tell a story in order to survive. On the right side, you see an image of a plant, and if you don't speak German, it says, "I live here," from a so-called first plant perspective. The plate has to tell the story of the plant so that tourists are not trampling over this plant. And on the left side, you see a plate standing nearby a peat excavation area, telling people why it's important to save and protect this area. In the last 4 years, I worked a lot on plants, and I met a lot of scientists. I went to a lot of sites. I met a lot of plants. The writings of the Canadian anthropologist Natasha Meyer, for example, have been a great inspiration for me. In 2016, she coined the term planthropocene, which is a perspective on the world in which are plants central. And humans live up to the responsibility to create space for plants and for biodiversity. And this I find a very nice quote of her: "What is good for plants is good for everyone else. Get on their side. Consider yourself at their service and get to know plants intimately and on their terms." And for me, the very most striking and inspiring part is the last part of the last sentence, "on their terms." And I think this is really important, and I hope you can keep this in mind for also the next part of my presentation. Because although plants are everywhere, and they play a central role in the preservation and also the creation of all life on Earth. We very seldomly perceive plants and their important role, which is called, it's an informal term in educational and biological science, plant blindness. Plants per second is a speculative framework that I invented myself, that I challenged myself, and it may also become a speculative tool. The focus is on the attempt to question, challenge, and possibly overcome this plant blindness by the means of the digital. A first step is to ask some question around representation of plants in digital environments. What image do digital environments produce and leave behind of a plant? How are digital plants created and in which way they are used or interacted with? And how can digital environments become more plantish, plant-like? And can they even enable us to connect with real nature? PPS is developed in a reference or in an analogy to a technical value that is very important nowadays, which is called frames per second. It's very important for the evaluation and production of digital real-time environments. If you are an artist yourself, a creator, a gamer, I think you know this term already. And most probably you also used it in your own process. If you are not familiar with the term frames per second, in Germany it's called Bilder pro Sekunde, images per second, you should know that this is a technical value that gives information about the current computing power of any system that is capable of creating images. Technical system. If the computer manages to create more than 30 or more likely 60 frames per second, then we can call it a real-time environment. So we need a lot of frames to create an immersive and interactable environment. What is so interesting about frames per second? Come with me on this ride or on this thought that if realism is a benchmark for the quality of an experience, and I think this is not 100% everywhere true case, it's just like one part, but if, please come on this trip, then frames per second is a currency in this game. Right? Because if you have a lot of frames, you can create a lot of reality, a lot of immersiveness. To achieve a higher realism, digital designers, creators, artists have to ask themselves, what is important? And how do I distribute and balance the woman power and the available computing power? These are the core questions I have to ask myself. And the next question is, how can I base my decisions on the perceptual patterns that people have? Looking at plants, looking at humans, because we are biased, as we know. Human bodies and human artifacts are mostly at the core of any digital environment, because people are interested in humans. Even though plants are looked today many more times better than the tree in Mystery House, the games I showed you in the beginning, plants are still very often shown in highly simplified and under-complex way. I find this funny, or a little bit funny, interesting meme from 2021, where a gamer was making fun about the alleged improvement of the depiction of grapes in the game after an expansion came out of the game Final Fantasy XIV. So this is 2021, and it's hard to see the difference between these two grapes before and after this expansion. But what is interesting and what is really easy to see is the difference between the plant and the human. What we know and experience ourselves, if a content is not desirable, meaning trending, it's not only simply less visible or worthless, but it's also threatened to disappear in real terms. This is where we're at in our digital society. What can we assume out of this thought? If a plant species in a digital environment is representing simply an ornament for a place for human action, or its technical doability, meaning it's not desirable, then it's also threatened to disappear in real terms. In the following video, I want to show you some examples and want to dive into some digital environments to make my point even more clear. I will concentrate on games, and even more, I will concentrate on games with an approach to a realistic aesthetics. In the beginning, I will show you some, let's say, human-made objects that appear in these games so that you can compare also yourself towards the games, the plants that you will see in these games. And also what is important, this is only some examples. There are a lot of other games, so it's not like a scientific completeness. Please keep that in mind. So you will see this game, and we are in this fishing hut here, and you see already on these papers there's a writing, so it's very highly, in a way, detailed. Then there's also this fishing rod. It has a physics engine running on. You have like very nice logos on it. Looks pretty realistic. And then when you look at one of these plants, it looks pretty nice from this one angle, but then when you come a little bit more clear, you already see one of the problems. It has no extension, no three-dimensional expansion. It's like a cutout, like a paper that is standing in the surrounding. And even more, if you look to the right side, you see that these plants are moving with the player's head. They are moving towards, as if in their DNA they have already the human-centric approach of this game. And then another example. Look at this berry tree. I don't know actually what it is. It has also this very hallucinatic movements of the twigs moving with my head. And also the berries are super flat and have a white outline. And then we have a next example, and in the next example I want you to look at the avatar beginning. It's like very highly detailed, the hair, and then these metal wheels and these braces around these metal wheels, amazing. They have an extension pretty well rendered, right? And then we look at something that is called, or that is a moss on these stones. And if you get a little bit closer, you already see the problem here. It looks more like a graffiti on something that is already very blurry. So I think there's a kind of a very strong hierarchy in between that can be also seen here in between this grass. It's like a flat surface where you have some texture that tries to depict some plants. And then also this game, it's not so much about the foreground because the game already is very stylized, but look at the background. Trees are appearing when you move away. The bush in the foreground is going away when you are heading towards these plants. And this is what you see all over the game, meaning that from the first moment, these plants are, unlike human-made objects, already made to give space to human interaction and to human notions and ideas. And also here in this last example, farming simulator, there are games where plants are at the core of the attention. But look at these plants, they are all the same assets. It's one and the same asset. And this I find also a very funny glitch, actually. To show you at least one digital or one aspect, one technical aspect behind this, I searched the internet and some 3D asset stores to find one of the plants that was shown in the first example, and you see it on the lower side, and the second one from the left is one we saw in the first example. And what is interesting about these asset stores, you have no information about what's these plants, no name, nothing, where they are living, how big they are, whatever. It's a purely technical description, and it's not always like this, but often you find these very technical. And this is the approach how creators and designers are like going on these asset stores to fill the void in their games, actually. And then look at the object itself. This is the 3D object. So it's a very limited geometry. It's like basically two squares being crossed. Then you put on this texture. It's the same texture for both of these sides. And voila, this is what is meant to be a plant for our perception. And this is already enough for us to mock us and to make us clear that this should be a plant. So I want to sum up a little bit the core findings of these examples and also other experience I made throughout the last year. So what we already found out, plants have to provide a technically efficient background for human actors and their artifacts. Plants are not meant to be looked up closely. Mostly plant species are used that are more suitable to technical optimization, which is interesting. So if you are a tree with a berry, forget it, you will never be seen. Plants are often not individuals, which is also interesting, meaning you are taking one object and using it 1,000 times just by making it a little bit more bigger and smaller and rotating it a bit. Okay, in the last 10 minutes, I want also to point out a little bit how I try to challenge myself with plants per second and how I try to make digital environments that I create more plantish. Because, as you can see, I was concerned and researching about these topics throughout my work and throughout my research. In 2019, I was still concerned with speculative plans. So I was thinking about, oh, what kind of crazy plans can I make and how can they look like? But then 1 year later, having a residency in Riga in Latvia and meeting these plans in one of the most enchanting bogs or peatlands, swamps I ever found, I made these series of photos trying to challenge my perspective and my gaze towards plants. In the same year, I created the work Blooming Love, which I was lucky also some weeks ago to exhibit a small version here at Gelsenkirchen in Places Festival, and that was also shown at Werkleitz in Halle. It was a part of a Emara residency. So I was really happy to create this work, and I called it A Greenhouse for Human-Plant Relationships. And I use, as you can see, an AV installation in the foreground, a photographical print in the background, and it has a light installation also, so it's a very sensual environment. And at the core, we have a virtual reality. A digital bog that can be viewed throughout with these goggles, with the virtual reality goggles. And for this, I modeled 30 real plant species of a Latvian raised bog as accurately as possible. These avatars, how I call them, plant avatars, are representing the plant species which together are responsible for the creation of peat. Peat is in German Torf, and what is interesting about peat is that on 3% of the land surface, 30% of the world's carbon is stored. So I find it a very impressive form of immersiveness. But as I said, how do I create a high PPS value? Give space to leaf, fruits, blossom, and branches. I took care of the real morphology of these plants as much as possible. My first aim was to model the plants in much higher real resolution because I wanted to try to push the boundaries of what is possible to show in a real-time digital environment. And as you can see, I took care of as much as possible of the nosps, of the fruits here, also of the roots, of the thickness of the leaves, of all the elements that make a plant a living being, right? Beautiful. Making the little visible, the second. Instead of using a flat texture to depict lichen and mosses, I created also high detailed models as I did for the bigger species. But throughout the process, I had to also make them flat due to a decrease in the frames per second rate. But since I modeled them in these kind of clusters, I still had a kind of a three-dimensionality and a kind of a spatial expansion of these plants and was therefore more high resolution than a pure texture. Then next point is diversify, allow individuality. I think this is very important. For some plants, I created several individuals for each of these species to reflect on their individuality, but also on the way of a community that they live in. Only a little later in the process, I started to create also for some of them, some roots, but not for all of them. And also in the next step, I'm really interested to create species that reflect more on the age also of these plants. Next point, looking at plants. I think this is what I already said. With my works, I try to bring the plants into the uncanny valley of representation in order to make people see something, to interrupt our modes of seeing and experiencing. I position the visitor's gaze just above the ground of this digital bog, at the level of mosses and lichens. The visitors have no digital body and are intentionally reduced to a mere gaze. I consciously prevent any form of interaction in a real-time environment that is made for interaction. High blurriness in the background, as you can see here, is also intentionally added to force the visitor to interact and to engage with the plants in the proximity, with the morphology and the distribution and the coexistence. And also in my work, Nastien and Tropismen, which you can see an exhibition work here from 2022, had the same focus or a similar focus and used similar tools. It's an environment which can be called an an extended reality or something. It uses also real-time generative light, generative sound. We have 3 monitors here. There's no virtual reality, and these black glass, opaque glass objects that are in front of the monitor. I will come to this in a minute. What do I did here? I add specific plant movement. So I was really concerned, and I tried to represent at least one type of movement of each of these plants using these bones. This is this gray material that you see here, this gray object, allowing us as creators to move the underlying geometry of these elements. Then I created specific algorithms for each of these plants so that they can create this one aspect of their movement. I tried to get closer to the question whether the movements, if we could only see them, carry an empathic quality like a human movement does. Second, whom is moving whom? Invert human-plant interactivity. I created a setting where the audience has to follow the plant movement. Often only 1 out of 3 monitors active, so people have to face themselves to this direction. And then there's also these black, opaque screens hiding a part of the monitor. People have to move around or bend and actually to see a different layer of plant movement. It's wet peat, Torf in German. It's like the material, the afterlife of these plants, which is still also moving as long as it's wet and not being drained. Who's on stage? I also added for this work an app that the visitors can find, and that adds an additional information about the protagonists that were on stage while visiting the artwork. It's a bit of didactic, I know, but it's still a poetic approach towards the plant's life. And links to more information to the plants and to the peatlands can be found on this app. PPS is a proximity in distance. The Latvian peatland scientist Agnes Pride once said to me, "We have to leave nature alone." And I think after the pandemic, we already now start to see that this is something we should do. We should withdraw from a lot of habitats, stop conquering them for our human purposes, and even stop entering them at all. I think highly realistic, desirable representations of plants could help us to still maintain an emotional and connection to them and celebrate our absence with empathy. Then PPS is an affiliation through otherness, a connectivity through otherness. PPS can help us to emphasize the difference between humans and plants, because I think this is very important. Plants are not primarily here to perform human tasks. They are not an extension of human agency, but living beings on their own term. Taking seriously and emphasizing the difference between humans and plants in their temporality, in their form, can help us to develop a sovereign belonging in reference to this difference. And last but not least, learning to see plants. Even though PPS is a speculative framework, and it may still stay as a speculative framework, it shows how we look or how we don't look at plants. Just as in the non-digital world. In digital worlds, we just pass by. We don't look very closely. We overlook them. And we only pay attention if they can do something for us, for the climate, so that in order for us to survive. But the question is to how much plant is our attention apparatus and our empathy capable of? What value do we place on plants, their condition, and the reality of their lives? I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm also happy to discuss with you further. I will be here over the day. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day, every one of you. Bye.